look at a buffalo, you just don't see a big shaggy beast. You see life, you see existence. Those are our relatives. They are part of us.
Welcome, Ken Burns. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's truly an honor to have you here with us.
Oh, that's so nice. Thank you. I'm happy and very pleased to be with you.
So I want to focus our conversation really on your latest film, The American Buffalo. Before we dive into the questions, I'm going to give a very short recap of the story for those who aren't familiar. So the buffalo, or the bison, as they're sometimes called, are this massive, iconic mammal, really the symbol of the American West. But over a very short period of time, in less than 100 years, the buffalo were absolutely massacred, hunted to near extinction, mostly for their hides. The population dropped from an estimated 15 million to fewer than 1,000 animals. And this, of course, resulted in a period of catastrophic death and trauma for the native and indigenous people who relied on these animals to survive. But the story doesn't end there. It's also a story of resilience and of the gradual recovery of the buffalo. And today we have about 350,000 buffalo in the US, I believe. Most of them descendants of just 77 animals from a few founding herds. So it's a story of utter heartbreak, but it's also a story of hope. So with that, Ken, what brought you to the buffalo and why did you decide to tell this story?
In the mid-90s, we made a series on the history of the West. We did the story of Lewis and Clark. We did a history of the national parks. All of them in some ways intersected with the story of the buffalo. And we kept wondering why we hadn't turned around and done it. And I'm so glad we waited the several decades that it took, because we have a lot more scholarship. So in a way, the two parts are, I suppose, as I went into it, I thought one would be a kind of inferno, like Dante's Inferno, and the other would be the Paradiso coming out. As we got deeper into the film, it's much more than that. In some ways, we're just the first two acts of a three-act play, which we all, as citizens of the United States, but also of the world, are responsible for writing the final act. And it has to do with addressing climate change. It has to do with rescuing species or rescuing ecosystems and habitats that would permit those species to return, along with all the other species and all the other flora that have been driven out of places like the Great Plains of the United States, which was called and was the American Serengeti.
As I said earlier, this film covers not only the near extinction of the buffalo, but also the genocide of indigenous and native people. I'm wondering, how did you ensure the accurate and adequate native representation and participation in the film?
Well, that we insisted that there be that. Our consulting producer is a Cherokee Indian, Juliana Branham. Many of our advisors, we have several historical and academic advisors, were Native peoples. We told the story of how inextricably intertwined Native populations were with this most noble of beasts, our national mammal, not just the symbol of the West, but the national mammal now. These are people that have 600 generations of experience with this animal. So the story of the buffalo is intertwined with the story of Native Americans and intertwined with all of us too. It's a really tragic story, and it fortunately ends positively, or at least hands it over to the rest of us to figure out what are we going to do now. Now that they're not in danger of going extinct, what does that actually mean? To save it, is that really it? Or are there other responsibilities that we have? There are lots of NGOs that are trying to create habitat, an expanded habitat for buffalo. And it ought to be our responsibility to make sure that we have a place where the buffalo roam and the deer and the antelope play.
All right, Kim, well, thank you so much for your time, and
Thank you
on this beautiful, beautiful film, The American Buffalo.
It's been my pleasure. Thank you.